Oh, okay. Do you want me to, you're going to give me a cue to kick off?
Yep, go ahead and kick us off, Jean. Good to
Okay.
have you back.
Well, I'm looking at the number of participants. I just wanted to make sure that we had, okay, very good. Well, welcome everyone. For those who haven't met me or forgot about me since I haven't been here for the last couple of sessions, I'm Jean Tedrow. I'm President CEO of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. I am so excited by this Nonprofit Management Institute. And I really would like to thank you all for being here and for caring so deeply about building the capacity of your organization and for your own personal professional development. Nonprofits do such important work in our community, and helping us help ourselves to do better is a really important part of the work that we do. So I will say thank you to Lisa Crossland, Rebecca Beck, Dr. Palmer, and Leslie Morales on our team for putting all of this together. And I hand it over to Lisa to acknowledge our partners and our sponsors. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Jean. Again, I'm glad you had a chance to join us today. I've been referencing you each session that we've been having. So great to see your face.
Thank you.
Hello and good morning again, everybody. Again, I'm Lisa Crossland, Chief Learning Officer here at the center. I hope everyone had a great weekend and get a chance to enjoy the beautiful weather we've been having lately. So we're almost there, folks. So the North Carolina Center welcomes you to the session 4 of the Nonprofit Management Institute for Strategic Planning. And just as Jean mentioned earlier, I'd like to thank our program team. Rebecca, wave your hand. Leslie, wave your hand, who will not only be monitoring chat, but also be helping with production behind the scenes as well as we move through the presentation. I'd like to continuously thank our sponsors, as you can see on the screen there, Triangle Community Foundation and Guilford Nonprofit Consortium, for continuing to support the Institute. It's very important that they're doing this for us. So I'm not going to take too long to play my Vanna White role. I'm going to move on to talk about the agenda for today, because it's a big one and we want to jump in, and it's an intense one. So I hope you have that double shot of caffeine by your side, because it's going to be a lot of good information on strategic planning. We'll go through a quick introduction. Dr. Palmer will do a recap of session 3. Then jump right into strategic planning and closing. And under strategic planning, as you can see, I'm not going to read all the bullet points there. There are a lot of areas that we're going to dive into. Again, as we have done in the other sessions, bathroom breaks will be built in. We're going to feel out the crowd, see how you're doing. As long as no one's jumping up and down, making funny faces, we'll gauge the bathroom breaks. So if there are not any other questions, and without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Palmer to take us off.
Thank you, Lisa.
Lisa.
A lot of L's, Leslie and Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. And good to see you, Jean. Glad you could join us this morning. We are going to be spending all of our time in our session today learning about strategic planning. As we typically do, we are going to do some introductions, and we'll do a recap of session 3. Go over all of the touch points that you see here on the screen. The touch points that you see are also reflected in the steps for strategic planning. And if I could, that's on page 60. So what you see here aligns with what's in your material. And so we will be going through each of these parts of strategic planning so that we can end on the other side having a pretty well-rounded understanding of what strategic planning is and how the process is implemented. And so before we do that, we do want to just do a little bit of a recap of session 3. And of course, our topic last week was program design, management, and evaluation. And we spent time learning more about each of those 3 elements of programming for nonprofits in terms of thinking about how to actually design the program. And if we could go to that checklist for program design. Good morning. I can see everybody now. I couldn't see everybody in the little window. So good to see you, and thank you for the good mornings in the chat as well. So in terms of last week, we walked through the different characteristics of program design, management, and evaluation. So as a recap, I just wanted us to just kind of revisit the checklist. There are some items that are in this checklist that we're going to spend more time on as a part of strategic planning, because those tasks cross over in terms of when we're designing and managing programs and evaluating programs as well as strategic planning. So again, as a recap, we reviewed 20 characteristics of programs. From the inception of a program to how the program is implemented, and then evaluation. As we mentioned last week, this is not all that could be included. You could very well add more depending upon what types of programs your organization offers. So there may be some areas or items that are not in our checklist that you may very well add. The other thing I would just point out here, it is a good idea, and I do recommend once you have carved out all the pieces of information that's in this checklist, you can save that. And when you're getting ready to grant write or develop a brochure or communicate any information about your programs, you can refer back to this. And it can be a running and kind of a working document where you can modify and add as you go along. So I do think that that is helpful. So what I will just ask, are there any just kind of questions that might be still with you as it relates to our topic last week? We did review your feedback, and so we just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to do that. And we can go back to gallery now. Any questions before we move into our new information? I don't see any hands raised.
Is that worksheet that you just showed us on the screen available somewhere?
You received it last week in the session, and it's in the wraparound. You would have received it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. We did have a couple of comments in the chat I can read off. From Amy, any best practices for avoiding transaction relationships in evaluation, but instead getting meaningful feedback and making spaces for community to help plan programs? Has anyone had success with a community advisory team, or community champions, or anything like that?
What I would say, and anyone else can chime in if they would like, nothing beats just having a conversation with the folks participating in your programs. It's inexpensive. It's and you can schedule those times, particularly if you're, let's just say, running a program by the year, like on a 12-month schedule. You can build into your programming year, you can build in opportunities for you to communicate and get feedback from folks that are participating and your partners. That could be helpful as well. And now with Zoom, you can convene your partners and the entities that you collaborate with in terms of feedback of how you might be doing or what their impressions are of your programs. And you can do individual phone calls, you can do individual Zooms. When folks show up, to participate in your programs, if in fact you're doing that face-to-face now, you can do that as well. I know that was a lot and fairly quick, but I would say keep it practical and just be aware of what your participants might be more receptive of doing, phone call versus conversation versus interview versus a survey, that type of thing. Does that help? Okay.
Amy said yes. Thanks in the chat.
Okay. Are there any other questions or thoughts about program design, management, and evaluation?
I just wanted to add just one thing, quick thing, Dr. Palmer.
Mhm.
When I was in direct service, one of the things that was very helpful, and some of you may already know this, but we had a requirement on our board to have a prior participant sit on our board. And so that way also helped with program with evaluation feedback in terms of getting any improvements from past participants, and especially if they're sitting in a board chair seat, that was very helpful. And then we also have when Dr. Palmer talked about community assessments, gathering and pulling into community food was always very important. So you have food and you bring people in for informal focus group and you talk about what are some things that they are seeing that are needed in the community, and how getting some feedback, having some already predetermined feedback questions to ask them, to have them to have open dialogue about what programs are needed, not needed, what you're doing helpful. I think that's also very important. That it's not exactly, we didn't call it exactly a community advisory team, but we did from time to time, maybe about once or twice a year, hold our community assessments by bringing the community in for these focus group meetings, and they were very helpful. Just adding that onto there.
Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to go into our introductions for today. As I mentioned before, our topic is strategic planning. We have a laundry list of items that we will be covering to help us to understand the process and how the process is implemented. And so we're going to go into breakouts for our introductions this morning. And what we would like for you to do in your breakout is to share your experience with strategic planning. And also, if your nonprofit organization has a plan, you might just kind of give kind of a high level, just kind of overview of what your plan actually looks like. Because we know we work through this process of strategic planning to get on the, to have a deliverable of an actual plan. And so, so when you go in your breakouts, I'll give you those kind of instructions again. One is to kind of share your experience with strategic planning, and or give a just kind of some insight as to what your plan looks like if you have one. If you have never engaged in strategic planning before, and your organization does not have a plan, then we encourage you to listen in to your colleagues as they kind of share their information. It will more than likely align with all of the work that we have planned today. So that's how we want to kind of get started in terms of going in our breakouts. Now, can I just get, using your reaction function on your Zoom, how are we feeling this morning? Can I see? I see a thumbs up from Wayne. I see Sheila. All right. Okay. All right. Good. Just wanted to do a quick check-in. I see some celebration. I see some Z's going on with Dawn and Ren. Okay. Well, again, you know, it's good to see all of you. I'll see you on the other side of your breakout.
Great. I'll go ahead and send us off into breakout rooms. Dr. Palmer, did you want me to share the agenda, session 4 agenda and the PDF, or wait for another one? Okay.
Yes. Rebecca is going to share the touch points for strategic planning, so you can kind of have those as you're having discussions about it. Rebecca, you'll have to give the other instructions on what they are doing.
Perfect. So I'll go ahead and I popped that in. Hopefully y'all can see that. Yep. So you'll go ahead and download that. I'll also put it in the chat for the breakout room so you have it there as well to refer to. Hopefully give me a thumbs up so you're able to download that. Sometimes documents in the chat give us issues. Does everyone see that there? Okay, thumbs up from Angelique, thank you. All right. All right, I'm sending you off in the breakout rooms and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Right.
Rebecca,
Yes.
hey, it's Jessica over here. I just had a quick question for you.
Sure.
So last week I kept getting kicked off, and when I came back in, so there's actually
Welcome back. Y'all had a good time in your breakout sessions. And Dr. Palmer, I'll pass it off to you.
Welcome back from your breakout, and hopefully you were able to gain some insight as to what your colleagues have been up to as it relates to strategic planning. The other element of what we were hoping for in the breakouts is that you could also align what you were hearing with what the steps and the touch points that we're going to cover today in the session, just to kind of get as a warm up to get us started thinking about strategic planning. Is there any one just kind of comment that you heard that sticks out for you that you learned about in the breakout session? So you can unmute yourself or you can put that in the chat. Is there any kind of one thing that you heard or that kind of stood out for you?
This is Wayne. I'll just speak for our group, Group 1. We had a great session, and we found out that that we're really all over the board as far as strategic plans go. But I think the couple of consistencies that we found were that don't be scared of it. Doesn't have to be a big document. You could start out very simple. You could do it as easy as 6 months to a year. It doesn't have to be this big plan that you roll out. Just get started with it. The other piece was that the executive directors have to be in line with this board director, because if the board somehow or another is not on board, not with you on that, it doesn't work out. So, and the SWOT analysis really becomes very, very, very important. It's a good place to start, and just make it simple to start with. And then, I can get complicated from what we did. We had a person that came in and actually helped us with ours, and we good at following it this time, not the last time or two, but this time is better. And we've actually grown from it.
Wayne, do you mind just doing a shout out to the folks that were in your group? Not to put you on the spot to remember their names. Yeah, just can you kind of tell us who was in your group?
I can't remember their names. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. If you were in Wayne's group, give me a thumbs up in your react. Okay, got it. Okay, just trying to get a sense of that. Thank you for sharing. And all of what Wayne touched on we'll be discussing as it relates to strategic planning in our session today. Can I hear from another group? What was some of your takeaway? And what did you learn about some of the people that are in your group? Because we are doing introductions as well. So Any takeaways about strategic planning or any takeaways about who you met? Anyone?
So I'll jump in here. This is Dawn Blagrove. The other folks in my group were, boy, I should know this because I've seen them a bunch of times. Joy and shit, I remember stories, y'all, like the lady from Boston and some other folks. But one of the things that we talked about that was kind of a general theme was there's not a one size fits all for strategic planning, and that for some folks having one that is, you know, a big plan is, or, you know, multi-year strategic plan is most feasible and helpful, and for others like my organization that is more reactionary in the way that we show up in the community, it may be a shorter time frame would be more effective. But I also think that, as I raised in our group for myself, Emancipate NC doesn't have a strategic plan. Not necessarily. We don't have a strategic plan, but it doesn't hinder us from working and doing a tremendous amount of work. Now, one thing that I think maybe a strategic plan would be helpful for is that very often, because we just never stop, right? We don't actually ever take the time to evaluate what we've actually done. And then we send out a newsletter or something and we all look at it and we're like, holy crap, we do a lot of stuff. But you don't, because you're constantly going, I don't know. I just want to elevate that some of us had really great detailed long-term strategic plans. Some of us have no plans, like myself. And I think that that's okay though. Like, I feel like maybe it could be useful, but I also feel like it's not hindering our work. It's not hindering our progress. And that's clearly evidenced by the footprint that we're leaving in the community and across the state. So maybe that footprint could be better. It could be, you know, more intentional, but right now I do not have the time with a 5-man organization doing the work that we are doing to spend 2 days building a dang strategic plan. Like, I just don't have it, right? So I don't know. If there are some suggestions for folks like us who are just like, we can't do it, that would be awesome.
Dawn, I really feel you. We're in a similar boat. It's kind of like we're too busy doing the work to be able to think forward to what we need to work on. It's weird. But for us, I think our strategic plan, we don't have a formal one either. But I kind of say that we've informally been working on a strategic plan for the last 3 years. It started with like literally a Post-it note of things we needed to fix. So they were like processes, procedures, things we needed to get down in writing that we didn't already have. And we just started like figuring out who was going to work on what in our spare time of kind of whenever we had slower seasons of work. It was like, okay, I'm going to take on the website and we're going to do some website redesign. Whenever I'm not focused on a big event or a big program and I have some time I can fit that in, that's when I'll go back to start working on that. So we had a lot of things like that. And over the last 3 years, we've really made improvements to that list to the point where now we're kind of just at the tail end of a list of a lot of really big things that we had started out with a while ago.
Thank you all for sharing. Good to hear what we know, and that is that all of our nonprofit organizations are at different places in the strategic planning. in the using strategic plans and developing strategic plans. The one thing that I will say is one of the things that strategic planning does, the whole process, it does kind of bring about some synergy amongst your board members, your staff, the people that you serve, because typically you're engaging all of your stakeholders in some way, shape, or form to what it is that you decision making around what you're doing, what your goals are. It does give you a formal document that you can share. It's not to say that the average person is going to walk up to the executive director of a nonprofit and say, hey, can I get a copy of your strategic plan? That's probably not likely. However, it does send a message that that all of your stakeholders have rallied around trying to determine a way forward and formally documenting that. Just like the program design management and evaluation checklist gives you a framework for capturing the different elements of your programs, something that you can store and save and reference and when you're writing grants or when you're talking to donors or when you're trying to help individuals understand your programs, you would have those documents to share or to pull from and create infographics and fact sheets and so on and so forth. So the strategic planning process kind of works in that same fashion. It's one of those tools that you could have in your toolbox. But one thing we do know, we all have a different set of tools in our toolboxes. And we utilize, even in some cases, the same tool, right, for different purposes. And so strategic planning is one of those tools, as is everything that we are going to be learning about and have learned about in terms of nonprofit management. So the usefulness of a strategic plan is definitely based on your nonprofit, where you are, how you work, how you function, and the kinds of information that's helpful to you as you go on this journey. I would encourage those nonprofits that are on the call, and thanks Dawn and Amanda for sharing, I would encourage you to consider that process and just kind of think about it in a way of, again, just being another one of those tools. Every nonprofit is different and every nonprofit functions differently. And there are different elements of managing nonprofits that is going to be, there's some of those elements of managing a nonprofit that are going to be different for each nonprofit in terms of priority. So I say you'll know when you're ready, right? And you'll know when you need it. And that is a decision that your nonprofit has to make. All right. So strategic planning is where we're headed. Last week, I think it was either last week or the week before, we had you in your breakout sessions to share with each other the mission of your nonprofit organization. And I didn't get an opportunity to share mine. So I thought I would take the time today to introduce myself in a different way. And that is as the executive director of a grassroots nonprofit located in Jamestown, North Carolina, which is Guilford County. So I'm going to have our team pull up our website. So this is the Guilford County Resource and Referral Center. I started this nonprofit with 2 grad students at the time in 2009, 2010. 2 grad students who were getting a master's degree in nonprofit management, and they wanted to start a nonprofit. And so we, over a Christmas holiday, completed the 1023 application and were awarded our 501c3, I think it was by March of that next year. So that would have been 2008 we worked on it, and then in 2009, 2010. And I know I'm a nerd for spending my Christmas break working on completing a 1023 nonprofit application, but that's what we did. And so we started this nonprofit, and we're doing, some of you may remember, community support therapeutic services, which is a Medicaid funded endorsed program that we were doing back then. one of the individuals who helped start was a case manager, and then the other individual worked for Guilford County Public Health, and they were classmates and friends. And so we came together and we created this nonprofit. So if you just scroll up, you'll see the mission and you'll see the vision of this nonprofit. So we didn't know, or they didn't know, I was the coach really in terms of completing the application. Needless to say, I've been the volunteer executive director since 2010. And so we have had case managers to help us do the therapeutic support, a licensed professional counselor, et cetera. And we set it up as a resource and referral organization that would focus on meeting the needs of children and families, but mostly we wanted to be able to be flexible and be able to offer programming based on what the needs were in our community. Jamestown sits between High Point and Greensboro. It's a real kind of small township. And so we ended up, with that address, and it kind of worked out because we can do work in High Point or we can do work in Greensboro and not necessarily have to be a part or blatantly, residing in any one of those cities. And then you'll see, if you go up a little bit more, you'll see the principles for practices. So we support, we help, we assist, we show individuals how to overcome and plan and prepare for their lives and whether it be education or whether it be other resources that they or their families may need. That's kind of it. We can kind of go away from that, but I just wanted to kind of share with you that part of who I am in this introduction. To just kind of let you know, for those of you who are on the call and you're a one-of-a-kind nonprofit organization, you're not, a part of a network of nonprofits, you're grassroots, you're trying to figure it out. You started the nonprofit at your kitchen table, right? You're paying for things out of your bank account. I get it. You're not getting paid or you're barely getting paid. I get that. And so, but I will say the difference that you're making in your communities is very important. And so hang in there, stick with it, keep focusing on your capacity, and eventually you'll be able to see some differences in the way in which you function and the resources you're able to acquire. It is it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so just kind of hang in there. And hopefully what we talk about today related to strategic planning will serve to be a tool as you continue to do the work that you are doing. Any questions for me about the Guilford County Resource and Referral Center and its mission? I don't see any. So seeing none, what I want to do, team, let's take a bio break here, and then we'll come back and we'll jump into those touch points. We'll jump right into our strategic planning work. 5 minutes. It is now 10:23, so 10:28.
Sounds good. We'll see you back here in 5.
Our work today. Oh, where does the time go? It's 10:30 already? Really? So if we could go to the PowerPoint slide in terms of perfect. The strategic planning, this is slide 11, one more. Here we go. So again, here are our touch points in terms of what we're going to cover today. We're going to begin with the startup, kind of thinking about how do we get started with strategic planning. We're going to then go into preparing to plan. we do have to think about, before we just jump into this whole process, there are some things we want to share with you as far as what we should be thinking about. Needs assessment and asset mapping, and also capacity assessment is another, these are areas or work or tasks that we perform and engage in so that we can gather information that will inform us about our goals and our outcomes that we're anticipating. The mission and the vision, typically we revisit that just as a check-in. Sometimes nonprofits will modify the mission and vision as a result of going through the strategic planning process based on, in some cases, what comes out of the needs assessment and the asset gathering process. Goal setting, objectives, action steps, outcomes are also developed. We engage in a SWOT analysis process to help us to just kind of gauge what's feasible as it relates to the goals that we want to achieve. We write the plan as a part of the process. The plan is implemented, then there's monitoring and tracking. We evaluate typically throughout. We have checkpoints, but then we also kind of give an update as to where we are over the course of typically a fiscal year. And then if the plan needs to be revised, we do that. And sometimes organizations will decide they want to do a complete overhaul. So sometimes it's an edit, and sometimes it is, just a complete rework. And so this is what we will be working on today. What's highlighted in blue, I think that's blue, teal. What's highlighted in blue are the areas that the whole group communicated back to us in the capacity assessment that we did. These were the areas that were noted as being areas either wanting to know information, or these were areas that collectively we identified as being areas that we want to work on. And so we just kind of highlighted those, and we're going to spend maybe a little bit more time on those areas, just because the group communicated that there was a need to do so. So this is our roadmap for today. And so we're going to jump right into startup. And if you go to your material handouts, pages 57 through 62, we want to just kind of begin with a definition of what strategic planning is. We're going to do like a truth and myth kind of worksheet, talk about the process, identify and suggest having a strategic planning committee. And then also we're going to talk about different choices that one would need to make as you're beginning this process. And so you shared with each other in your breakouts where you are with this, and if you had a plan, you shared also and gave some insight to that. What we want to do at this point is we're going to share a strategic plan and with an organization that's located in Raleigh. And Lisa is going to just kind of talk about this plan just in general, just real high level. And then we're going to go into our first worksheet in terms of our truths and myths about planning. So we're going to share that plan on the screen.
Do you want me to share, Leslie or Lisa?
Oh, yes, please.
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
So again, going back to what Dr. Palmer and the points that she pointed out, our strategic plan, again, this is an agency I used to work for, no longer there. It's been 26 years there doing direct service, working with homeless families and families that are in transition. And so we had I feel it was a pretty simple, straightforward strategic plan that not only the staff, but the board had an input with, and then we'll just go through it quickly. So as Dr. Palmer mentioned, you have your executive summary, which always should start, which talks about your mission, vision, and value of your particular agency, and what your agency stands for. We then broke out, slow down one second. We then broke out our strategic plan into we had committees. So we had a program committee, which had goals, strategies, impact in terms of we had to have metrics and KPIs that we had to meet each month. So we put that into our strategic plan. Scroll down or up, whichever way it goes. And a method of evaluating how we're going to meet those goals that we stated above. Fairly simple. Then we moved on to each area of our committees and departments. We had a strategic goal for. So here we had real estate and property management for affordable housing in the Raleigh area. Keep going. And the same, so we have the same format as you can see, but it's targeting different areas. Here we had a finance. What was our strategic plan for our finance department in fundraising and donations? Scroll down again. Oh, go back up. This is fundraising and donor development. Go on. Board development. We had goals and strategic plan for that as well. Business operations. And I think that's it. So again, all we just did is broke up our departments, had the same format, and each department would sit and go through what are the goals, the strategies for each of these particular departments. And it was pretty straightforward. Now, again, this is what our strategic, well, it's no longer but their strategic plan looked like at the time. Just to give you a fair, and I think it was a fairly simple model to follow, at least to getting something on paper and in developing a roadmap. And so when we would write a grant or, as you know, the federal government will come and monitor us. One of the things they would ask us for is our strategic plan. Can we see a strategic plan? And this is a document that was able to hand over to them. So I think it was fairly simple. Not simple to do. I mean, as simple in terms of the outline to follow.
Lisa, what was your budget there? What was the about?
Oh, but since Patsy Tome is a community action agency, it's about 1.2 million.
Okay. All right. So what I want us to kind of understand here is there are a few things that Lisa shared with us that I want to highlight. One is that oftentimes whenever you are securing government contracts or you are securing government funding, oftentimes they will inquire about your strategic plan. And so that's something that you should take a note of. The other thing is, notice in this strategic plan, as you will see in other plans, you're going to see those areas of capacity, right, that we are working on in this institute. You saw programs, you see finance, you see board development, you see, so those areas typically, when you are crafting that plan, those are areas of focus that typically you're going to see some of those fundamental management functions that we're covering here. I noticed in the chat that there's an inquiry for a copy of this plan. What I would suggest is maybe you just communicate with Rebecca and or Lisa. Who should they email? Rebecca?
They can email me. Well,
okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
I know they don't. I'll have to share my email. I know they're probably most familiar with Rebecca's email at the moment, so I'll share it in the chat.
Yeah, yeah. If you would communicate with her individually for that. But what I was saying is that also keep in mind that there are areas of your strategic plan that may be very much internal to your nonprofit agency, but there also may be specific goal categories in your plan that are specific to your community. And so I always want to point out that, your goals may be as it relates to the internal workings, but also it may be as it relates to community. So keep that in mind. Lisa is right in terms of thinking about this as this is a real practical way. It's very typical. It gets the job done. And you have to determine the strategic planning process you're going to use based on your capacity to do so. So every organization will approach this differently.
Right.
If we could go back to gallery. Lisa, did you have anything else you wanted?
No.
Okay. All right. So again, that just kind of gives us this kind of visual. You can also just do a Google of samples of strategic plans, and so many will come up. I mean, my goodness, there's so many examples out there. in terms of how you might put this together. In your packet on page 57, we have a definition there of strategic planning. And there are a couple of things I want you to add to this. The first is that strategic planning is a process, and typically there's about 8 to 10 steps. And most consultants, when we do strategic planning with a nonprofit, we follow those 10 steps. There may be a little bit of a variation from nonprofit to nonprofit or consultant to consultant or staff to staff, but for the most part, you're going to engage in these 10 steps. And those 10 steps, as I mentioned earlier, are on page 60 of your material. The second thing I want to point out in terms of this definition page is that a strategic plan is a formalized way. It's very formal, right? It's a formalized way of communicating your vision and the actions that you're going to take to achieve your vision for your nonprofit over a certain period of time. So some plans are 2 years, 3 years. We don't see strategic plans hardly ever anymore beyond 5 years. I mostly see 3 years, but typically it's going to be over a period of time. It's a formalized way of communicating how and what you are going to be engaged in doing over that period of time to actually achieve your vision. The other thing I would add to that is strategic plans oftentimes answer the questions, 3 questions: what, how, and why. They tell the reader of that plan what your nonprofit is all about and what it's doing. It also gives an indication of how you're going about doing that work as it relates to your goals. And it also includes why you're doing it. And that is typically communicated in outcomes and impact. So oftentimes when you're looking at the plan, that's kind of what, if I had to wrap it up in a bow, so to speak, what, how, and why. The other is that, and I think this is probably an important point to make, because we had quite a few questions about board engagement. How do I have an active board? How can I engage my board more? The strategic plan serves as a guide to your board of directors. And what it does is it helps them. It doesn't show them in the weeds what's happening in your nonprofit from day to day, but it gives them kind of this helicopter view of what you are working on as it relates to that what, how, and why. And so you can give updates in your board meetings, where we are in the planning, in the strategic plan, what we're achieving, what we're accomplishing. And so this is very helpful for board members because they're not with us every day. A lot of our board members only interact with us when we meet once a month or once a quarter or once a year. And so if they have this kind of tool that they can reference and you're kind of keeping them in the loop that way, oftentimes it helps them to stay abreast of what's happening in your nonprofit. And then the last point in terms of this definition page is the plan. Ultimately, the process produces a plan, as Lisa explained and gave an overview of the example. It gives us this document again that we can then refer to, we can use as a guide for the board. It serves as a guide for the staff, stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. You can post your strategic plan on your website, or if your strategic plan, some strategic plans are 100 pages long. And so you might pull out some salient pieces of information, highlight that on your website. So I just added some nuggets to that strategic planning definition page, just to kind of help you think about that. The next item is that we're going to do a truth or myth kind of quiz. So that's page 58 in your material. And so we want you to take a couple of minutes to complete the truth or minute, I say quiz, that's the teacher in me, but to give us your feedback as to which of these items do you think is a truth or a myth about strategic planning? And it is on the screen as well. We'll take about another 60 seconds. So we've talked about all of these points in terms of, well, not all of these points, but we've alluded to some of the points that we've highlighted here in terms of truth or myth. And so we're going to go through each one of these. And if you all could just kind of give us some shout outs as to what you think the answer is. And we're going to do this. We're going to stay in the main room to do this. And so hopefully I can kind of see us reaching consensus around how we want to label these as a group. So the first one is whether or not strategic planning is systematic, whether or not it's a process, whether or not it's structured, or whether or not it's data-based. Is that truth or myth? I see a T in the chat. All right, looks like we're going to rest with T for this one. All right, we're going to keep going to the next one. Strategic planning is a substitute for leading, a substitute for judgment. Truth or myth? I see a lot of M's, Rebecca. I think that's the one that we're going to land on for that one. Let's go to number 3. Strategic planning is smooth, predictable, and a linear process. Oh, I see myth. And number 4, strategic planning guides the acquisition and allocation of resources. Okay, so again, we're just digging a little deeper, taking a deeper dive into what this whole kind of idea of strategic planning and what it's all about. I think we're going to land on truth here. Number 5, the process is about building commitment. That one looks like it didn't take us long to decide on that one. And then number 6, strategic planning predicts the future. What do we think? Truth or myth? That one's a little interesting. The strategic planning predict the future. Okay. And then the last one, strategic planning involves choosing specific priorities. All right. So, Rebecca, can you show us, or Leslie, the answer key? So here we go. So you can kind of gauge kind of what your answers are or were to the quiz in terms of thinking about what strategic planning is and what it is not. It doesn't predict the future, right? It helps us think about what we would like the future to be, and it helps us to frame it, but it doesn't necessarily make a prediction. That's up to us. And it doesn't, number two, it does not eliminate the task of leadership. Leadership is still necessary, and being able to make judgment calls as it relates to the plan and what's in it and the implementation is significant in that regard. So that was our truth or myth. We're going to kind of keep moving with our items here. The next piece of information that we're going to talk about is the process. And so that is page 59 in your material. We've been talking about this pretty much all morning so far in terms of what the process is. You heard process in your breakouts. You heard Lisa talk about process. We looked at the 8 steps or the 10 steps, the different touch points. All of that is about process. And so we're walking through the process now that a nonprofit can engage in as it relates to kind of managing and doing strategic planning. I've already referenced page 60. That's the process as well. And so we've referenced that a few times already this morning. Committee, a strategic planning committee. It is very helpful to have a strategic planning committee to support the executive director, as the executive director provides the facilitation and coordination of the process. And oftentimes a strategic planning committee will involve key stakeholders. Lisa mentioned in her example that the staff was involved, the board was involved. That it's not unheard of for funders to give feedback, or for nonprofits to do interviews with funders or focus group with funders to get some insight as to what they think this nonprofit should be focused on in this plan. You know, our different local governments, city, county, townships, you may engage some of those individuals, your partner organizations. It just depends on who you want to hear from and who you want to inform what you do and the pieces of information that you lay out in your plan. So that's your committee. And then choices that we need to make. I'm going to pause here just a little bit so that you can just kind of look on and think about this particular part of what it is that we are doing. There are some choices or some decisions that we need to make as it relates to how you go about making or doing strategic planning. If we could go back to the gallery, I want to pause here, and I'm going to just go silent for about a minute and let you just look upon this information, and let's kind of talk about this. And I see a couple questions in the chat, Rebecca. I saw one about SWOT that's coming later, so we will get to that. And Rebecca, I don't know if you see something that I'm missing.
Nope, I don't think so,
Okay.
unless they were somewhere hidden within truth and myth, but I think that was just the one about SWOT.
Okay, yeah, we will do actual work with SWOT, so. Before I just do some highlights of strategic planning choices, are there any just kind of initial questions as you've had a moment to review? So again, we are getting geared up for for strategic planning. These are all things we need to think about. What is strategic planning? How can it be useful with truth or myth? What is the process? The committee or a committee to help kind of move the process along, and then some other choices that we need to make. Any questions that come to mind? You can unmute yourself as it relates to these choices.
I have a question, Dr. Palmer, but just another comment, if I may. As we're talking about, is when Dr. Palmer will get to the SWOT analysis, and as you're thinking about your metrics and your goal planning, have you all heard of, and you can just do a thumbs up, Dr. Palmer, have you heard of going from, I know everyone has heard of SMART goals, right? Going from SMART to SMART-T, right? Have you heard of that?
Smart or smarter. There's also smarter. Yeah.
What does the SMART-TER stand for?
I don't
Yeah.
remember what the, I think it's evaluation and report back. I think that's what the E and the R is.
Because in the SMART-T is how do you embed inclusion and equity in your goals that they're adding on for SMART-T. So that's something that the center takes very close to heart in terms of everything that we're doing, even as we're looking at our strategic planning, making sure that we're embedding inclusion and equity in all of our goal metrics. So make sure that if that's your goal as well, if that's something that you're embracing, that you're thinking about how to do that as well. Just wanted to add that in there.
Great. And thanks, Lisa, for that point, because I know that quite a lot of funders have made a shift. A lot of your foundations that are awarding grants are asking, how does equity, inclusion, and diversity, or some combination or singular, how does that fit into your overall mission vision of your organization? And so that is showing up quite overtly. I mean,
exactly.
It's pretty much, if you're not getting funded. I mean,
exactly.
That's really what's happening.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
In terms of choices, are there any questions that you have? I just want to highlight a couple things, and then we're going to move into some more work. In looking at strategic planning choices, again, this is page 62. And is it SMART-T, SMARTIE, or SM? Okay, got it. Okay, just want to make sure that's what it is. So a couple things I want to highlight on the strategic planning choices. The very first item is who will actually do the plan. So if you go to the bottom, will we hire an outside consultant to facilitate the process? This is a significant decision to make. As an executive director, you may understand strategic planning, you may know how to facilitate the process, and you and your board may decide that you're going to do that internally. There is nothing wrong with that. But you also may decide that you want to secure a consultant to help you to engage in strategic planning. The piece of advice I would give, if you're going to secure a consultant, spend time learning about the process, so that when you're talking to a consultant, you're understanding what they are offering, and you're also able to negotiate what parts of this process will you do internally, especially if you have staff, and what parts of this process will the consultant do. So that's important to remember if you're gonna, bring someone from the outside in to help you. You may also have board members, or you may have key stakeholders as well that may do strategic planning. There have been times where I've facilitated a strategic planning process for a nonprofit, and one of their board members does strategic planning. And so they head up the strategic planning committee, and they interact with the consultant, or they may do 80% of what needs to be done and have the consultant do only some parts of the process. So that's something to think about in terms of how and who is going to actually lead and guide the process. That also plays out in the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th item, who will lead the planning process. That typically it involves your board chair and or your executive director. And they typically have a message in the plan. So they typically write some type of message or letter that we include in the strategic plan of support, highlighting the importance of it, et cetera. So that's something to think about as well. I'm going to stop there with kind of my highlights. And I don't know if any questions have come up for you as I was sharing that. I'm going to move right along in our work. So if we could go back to the PowerPoint slide there, preparing to plan. Preparing to plan. So we just finished startup. Now we're going into preparing to plan. So if you were in your note taking, I guess you could call the first part startup kind of part 1, and preparing to plan part 2. And thinking about, why do we plan? Is your organization ready to plan? Involvement and commitment, what does that look like? Who should be involved? What documents might be useful? We've already talked about choices, but we're going to revisit that because that comes into play again. And then the work plan, what is that going to look like? And we're talking here, the work plan to do the strategic planning, or your timeline to do the strategic planning is what we're focused on here. In terms of what is your organization ready to plan? That's where we are. In your packet, you have a worksheet. It's on page 63. And what we want you to do, we're going to do this in your breakout session. We're going to do that in breakout session. 63, pages 63 to 67 is all about preparing to plan. So I'm going to slow down just a little bit and just kind of let you kind of flip through pages 63 through 67. That's our preparing the plan work. All of what you see here. And we're going to have you complete the is your organization ready to plan? So what we've tried to do leading up to part 2 is to kind of set the stage, give you some background, give you kind of an overview orientation to what strategic planning is. And so now the big question is your organization ready to plan? Is your organization ready to plan? So we're going to have you take a few minutes to complete our questionnaire. And then we're going to do some math, some addition, no subtraction, just addition. We're going to do some math to determine kind of where you are in your perspective of where your organization is in terms of being ready to plan. Okay. If we could go back to the gallery. And I'm going to go silent here for about 2 or 3 minutes and let you complete, is your nonprofit ready to plan? Can we go back to the gallery, Leslie? We'll take about another minute for you to complete the "Is your organization ready to plan?" And if you look at page 64, once you add up your points and you get to the end, there is a scoring chart on page 64. And if you could put in the chat what your score is. I'm doing kind of my own little keeping up with the scores. We've had quite a few 14s. I think the highest I saw was 23. The lowest I've seen is 13. So if we're looking at our scoring sheet, a 14 or less, there's no urgency, but your organization should at least do strategic planning 3 years after your last strategic planning process. 20 or more, your organization is ready for a strategic planning process. So in terms of need, if you're between 15 and 19, your organization probably would benefit from the strategic planning process. So this is just a little tool that you could use. You might share this with your board and get their feedback because they, no pun intended, but they need to be on board if you're going to engage in strategic planning. And so this might be a way to begin a conversation about strategic planning in terms of, you know, are we ready to take on this task? So again, in this part of our work today, pages 63 through 67, these are all of our resources here to kind of help us to think about and get prepped to go into strategic planning. Page 65, who should be involved? We've talked a little bit about this in the startup section, but what we do here is we give you the different roles that individuals have in a nonprofit space, and then what a description of what their role would be in the strategic planning process. So just to kind of give you an idea of what individuals would or could do as it relates to this process. So you've got the executive director or the president and CEO. There's that. Whoever is going to write the plan, meaning mechanically put pen to paper, design all of that of your plan. And then if you're going to have a facilitator, who would that be? That facilitator could be internal or external. We've already talked about the strategic planning committee, the board, the staff. Definitely have clients or participants who could be involved in the planning process. If you already have participants in your programming, for example, on the board, as Lisa mentioned earlier, then you have those individuals engaged already and they can contribute as well. And then, as I mentioned before, there are other stakeholders that you might want to involve. Page 66, it goes along with the choices handout under startup. We've kind of laid this out differently in terms of thinking about decisions that you'll need to make or questions you need to answer. So it goes along with that information. And then you have a strategic planning work plan, This is a way for you to identify the strategic planning activities that have to be completed, how you're going to go about doing that, who's responsible, what outcomes are you trying to obtain as it relates to the plan, or putting the plan together and getting through the process, and then kind of the time that you're going to need to do it. So again, we're preparing the plan and we're trying to carve out a way forward for moving into the planning process. The last thing that we're going to share with you as it relates to information about preparing the plan, then we're going to go in our breakouts, is a document that we have called the useful documents. And there are some documents that might be helpful as you're trying to engage in strategic planning. And these are documents that you would have as a nonprofit. It's not documents that you would necessarily have to create, but there may be information that you already have in-house that can inform the answer or your response to questions that we are asking in the strategic planning process. So if we could pull up useful documents. So here is just a quick inventory sheet where we're just sharing with you documents that will help inform the questions that we're answering as it relates to developing a strategic plan. And so you might have documents that are mission related, financial documents, administrative, like capacity oriented documents. If we could move the document up. And then governance documents in terms of information that our board of directors is utilizing. You may use some of these, or you may not necessarily use all of these documents, but what you're doing here is in your preparing the plan is you're really kind of noting how accessible are these documents and do you have them? So that when you get into the process and you start working through those steps, if you have to reference this information, you already have it. So this is not in your handout. This is one of our capacity building supportive resources. And so Rebecca will share, or Leslie will share this document. Do we need to, maybe let's go back to, are you putting it in the chat, Rebecca? I see you doing, are you putting it in the chat or no? No, not that document. It'll be in the wraparound.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put it in the chat really quick too. I just have to export it.
Oh, okay. Okay, all right, so it's coming your way. If you think about all of what we just shared, that was a mouthful, right? That was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot. We talked about, is your organization ready to plan? Who's going to be involved? What choices do you need to think about? What decisions do you need to make? The useful documents what documents do you have on file or in-house that's going to inform this process? And then what will be our work plan in terms of actually completing the strategic planning process? Quite a bit of info. What we want you to do in your breakout is we want you to spend more time with that information. So that's pages 63 through 67. And the document that Leslie just put in the chat, the useful documents handout. So what we want you to do in your breakouts is we want you to continue to work with this information. And we want you to share with each other what pieces of information that we just share in part 2 that appear to be useful to you as it relates to strategic planning. And I would also encourage you to go back to page 60, because that's where you have the whole list of the steps in the strategic planning process, and also the what do we call it, touch points that we shared in the chat as well. So I know it's a lot of information, but we're going to sit with this. We're going to sit with this for a few minutes before we keep going. We've done part 1 and part 2, and then we're going to go in breakouts, let you have some conversation around what it is you have in your possession at the present time. By all means, craft a question for your group in terms of some things that may not be clear, or that maybe we can shed some light on. So I'm going to let Rebecca put us in breakouts. And again, your instructions, you're discussing the usefulness of the information that we've shared so far, part 1 and part 2. We're going to do that in breakouts for about 15 minutes. We may just let you stay a little bit longer than that. Please feel free to take a quick break in that space. You and your group decide if you would like. If you don't, you can just continue to converse. We'll give you a warning when we're about to bring you back into the main room. See you on the other side of your breakout.
Sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms, and we'll gather back here around 11:30.
We just want to just kind of not omit a couple questions that were in the chat, Lisa.
Yeah, I think Kia Thacker was asking, and I'll read it real quickly in case people haven't seen it. Have people employed an incentive or bonus for staff who serve on the strategic planning committee? That's one question. This is something that repeatedly gets asked in an organization, that staff ask if they're going to get additional compensation for serving on a time-consuming committee. Simple answer, no. No, I mean, you can award your volunteers in some other kind of manner, giving them incentives, but not. I know at our agency, we used to, if we had some indiscretionary funds, or if we had gift cards that were that we had lying around for staff appreciation, we would do that, but they wouldn't get an additional pay of time, because if they're salaried, that's something that just goes along with the job. And that's something that we're finding that you have to really explain to your staff, what's the difference between a salaried employee and an exempt employee. The second question real quick came from Gloria. We just need a little bit before we can answer your question. Can you elaborate on what you mean by, you said, can you elaborate more on examples of having values issues being discussed? Not sure what you mean by that. If, again, that came from Gloria.
Yes, so in that, are you ready for strategic plan checklist? One of the questions was, values issues are often discussed in the organization, and there is agreement on the values base of the organization. I know throughout the strategic planning process, we identify our mission, vision, and values. But in terms of this organizational checklist that you're providing, what would you give as an example of what that should look like? Or what's a specific question, especially if you already have a value statement, that you would talk to with your board about that? I mean, can you give a more specific example?
I'm trying to get to,
go-
can you put the checklist back
Yeah,
up?
I'm going there. I'm just going there to I think I know what she's alluding to, but I want to get, which bullet point is it, Gloria? No, the second bullet point.
Well, yeah, so when we had to come up with a score for are we ready for strategic planning, the second bullet, in order to score yourself, it asks that question about values. Can you give more context for that?
Yes, so basically what we're talking about here is, does your organization already engage in discussion about your values? And I'll just kind of use the example. Currently, a lot of what nonprofits are being asked is, do you value equity, diversity, and inclusion? And so that would be an element of this particular bullet point. It may change. It may be, if you notice on the nonprofit that I helped start, we have principles for practice. That's another way of communicating what that organization values in terms of how it serves the people that it is set up to help. So here we're just asking, are you already engaging in value issues, types of discussions in your organization? And is there agreement on what your values are? Does that help, Gloria?
Yes, that's, thank you.
Okay, yep, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna move along in our process. And we wanted you to spend time with part 1 and part 2. Now we're gonna go into part 3, or element 3 of this process. Needs assessments is a part of what we do in the strategic planning process. In this workshop, we don't train on how to do a needs assessment. What we're doing here is helping you to see where information that you would gather from a needs assessment aligns with the strategic planning process. So in your handout packet, page 68 through 81, you have several documents to kind of help to frame if you were actually going to go out and actually do a needs assessment. So we kind of provide this as kind of a helpful tool to inform you as to what a needs assessment is. And we know that's looking at, in relation to your programming, looking at what does the community need as it relates to the programs that you offer, and does what you offer align with what the needs are. In that packet of information, again, it's page 68 through 81. We don't train in this workshop on how to do a needs assessment. What we're doing here is informing you on how a needs assessment aligns with this process. So what we've provided for you is the purpose of a needs assessment, a template that you can use to determine how you're going to engage in the process of gathering needs information. Another tool where you can determine how much time you're going to allot for that. And then once you have that information back, how you're going to, or ways that you can gather that information. You can do focus groups, so you have that in your packet. You also have some tips on how to do those. You have in your packet information about surveying, if you're going to survey key stakeholders to get information back, and then how you're going to collect that data and collect that information, and then how you're going to analyze it once you have the information back from a survey or focus group, if that's what you're utilizing. So that's all about how we get information back from a needs assessment. Ways to communicate what you find in the needs assessment is a public forum, or you can do a final report. So a public forum, or you can do a final report. The public forum is on page 80, and the final report is on page 81. So again, this is part 3, and we give examples and tips that you can utilize in order for you to be able to understand what the needs assessment brings and how it aligns with the process. So it informs us on what it is that we need to focus on as far as our goals in the plan. That's part 3. Part 4 is asset mapping. And I want to kind of show you and revisit what we sent in the wraparound. So we sent you an asset mapping tool. Again, we don't train in the strategic planning workshop. We don't train on how to do a asset map. What we do is orient you to asset mapping and how that aligns with the strategic planning process. So this example that we use is pretty practical. If you look at the table of contents, you're going to see some similarity in terms of what we do when we are focusing on needs assessments as it relates to what we do when we're focusing on assets. Ultimately, asset mapping is about capturing the resources that are available in your community that will help you with this plan, meaning help you to implement this plan and or help you to achieve the goals that you lay out in the plan. So needs, assets, needs, what does the community need from us as it relates to programming, as it relates to our mission and vision, and what assets are available to us. If you could kind of go, I think it's one more, keep scrolling up, keep going for me. So this is, again, this is a very, very practical tool to really kind of help you to just understand what asset mapping is and how it can inform our strategic planning process. So that's asset mapping. We've already talked about capacity. And so engaging in assessing your capacity, we did that at the top of the Institute. And that also informs what we do in strategic planning, because it reminds us of what our capacity is so that we don't overcommit in the plan if we don't have the capacity to engage and achieve some of the goals and some of the outcomes that we're trying to work through.
Yeah, and I think you already mentioned this, but I think we also saw that it helped with opportunities and threats. So obviously, Dr. Palmer talked about the opportunities to see what's needed, but threats, meaning if you want to open a daycare center or you want to do something else, look, the asset mapping is really helpful, because if you've already got 15 in the area, but that's your main mission and goal, it's not going to be helpful, because obviously that becomes then competitiveness and a threat potentially to your planning. In terms of if it's truly a need in that community, or do you need more of this particular thing that you want to offer?
So that said, we're going to focus on the goals of the strategic plan. We're going to focus on the goals. Now, we already mentioned that in the strategic planning process, oftentimes we will revisit the mission and we will revisit the vision. Page 86 and 87 of your packet outlines, gives you just a real practical worksheet to kind of write your mission, right? But then determine if there are things that you want to change or you feel like you need to change as it relates to the mission and vision. There's no one kind of way to do that. It's really just engaging with your stakeholders to determine if, in fact, you need to make any adjustments to that mission and vision statement. So that's that part of the strategic planning process. I want to go over to page 88 because we're going to do some work with this. This is our goals, action steps, and outcomes. So what we do here is we're going to look at pages 88 through 93. 88, the asset mapping document was sent out in the wraparound. So there's a question in the chat about that. Rebecca, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yes, we'll include that in the wraparound. You'll get a copy of that sent to you as PDF.
Okay. So what we want to spend some time on is the goals, the action steps, and outcomes. And so we're going to practice writing a goal with accompanying action steps and outcomes. So what we want to do is in your packet, you have on page 88 goals in terms of goal statements. You have an overview. And our goal statements, I always indicate my goals with answering the question, what are we going to do? And oftentimes strategic plans will have a set of goals. As you saw in Passage Home, in that example, there were a set of goals. And then there are action steps, or sometimes they're referred to as objectives on how you're going to achieve the goal. And then what are you hoping for as an outcome and or impact of achieving that goal? So page 88 is a quick reference of what all three pieces of what this information looks like. Then we provided you a sample of a goal statement. We provided you an example of action steps to accompany the goal statement, and we attached a outcome statement. So I'm going to have Leslie scroll back to the goal statement example. So page 89 is your goal statement example. Page 90 is your action steps that accompany that goal statement. And page 91 is your outcome statement. So if you have a plan and it has 7 goals, then you'll have 7 sets of action steps. You'll have 7 different outcome statements. And that's kind of how we build out that. That's really what I call the heart of the plan. The what, the how, and the why. The what, the how, and the why. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice writing a complete set, a goal statement, the action steps, and an outcome statement. You have a worksheet on page 92. So if we go back to the goal statement, the goal statement is an indication of what it is that we want to achieve. Now, you're just writing one goal statement. We're not thinking through the whole plan, but we want you to practice writing the set of information that, what again, as I call it, the heart of the plan. So the what for this particular example is on page 89. The how is on page 90. And the why is on page 91. So for this particular goal, this was a goal, I tweaked it, but this was a goal that I wrote, gosh, maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. And I tweaked it in terms of kind of making it current in terms of the date. So our goals are typically very specific, measurable, attainable, they're realistic, and they typically have a time frame attached to it. And so you see that on page 89. And then on page 90, you see the action steps that I took and that I explained in my information as to how I was going to achieve that goal. And then the third, which is page 91, this was the outcome that I anticipated. And so that's how we craft those pieces of information. So I'm going to go silent here, and I'm going to let you work on this worksheet, complete this worksheet for one goal. So you're going to identify one set of all of this information. And we're going to do that in the main room. And I don't know if we could have some work music for this work. Worksheet is on page 92.
I'll send you a link, Leslie, for some music to cue in.
And we realize for some of us, this is maybe the first time that you've seen such information, right? And so we understand that. So don't be too hard on yourself as you're working on this. I am here, but I'm gonna just be silent. But I am here, so if you have questions, the team is here. We're paying attention to the chat. You can unmute yourself if you like, if you have a question, but we're gonna do this in the main room. This would also be a good time if you wanted to take a quick little break. You can build that in. We'll be here for about 10 minutes. You do have in your packet on page 93, you do have action steps or action words, not action steps. You have action words, and we put that in your information as just a little resource for you. We're going to go ahead and continue with our work. So hopefully you've had a chance to bullet point. We know that in our workshop space, where you're able to kind of generate kind of the essence of what it is that we are crafting with the goal statements, the action steps, and the outcome statement. So you should have a rough draft in your worksheet of this. Now, some of you, your goal may be a program goal. So maybe you wrote your goal specific to a particular program. And then some of you may have written a nonprofit goal. So if you remember from the example that Lisa shared, the goals in that strategic plan typically are more organizational goals, but some of you may have crafted a program and or a nonprofit goal. So I want to point that out, and you're on the right track because again, what we want to do here is practice. We want to practice the writing and crafting this information. So in terms of what you have written, we're going to move into the SWOT analysis. So a SWOT analysis is typically the work that we do with a SWOT analysis is looking at the goals, right? The action steps and the outcomes. And we want to identify the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats as it relates to that particular goal, that set of outcome, that set of action steps, and the outcome statement. So it's like one big happy family, so to speak. And we are going to determine the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in terms of us trying to achieve that goal and see that outcome come to pass. So in your material, if you go to page 95 and 96, you will have the tools that you need to do the SWOT analysis. Let's go ahead and go to page 96 first, and then we'll come back to 95. So in terms of your SWOT, when we're describing the strengths or the attributes of a nonprofit, we're looking at those attributes that are going to be helpful to achieving the goals and helpful to achieving those action steps and that outcome statement. We're going to be looking for those attributes of the organization that are harmful to achieving the goals, action steps, and outcomes. Those are our weaknesses, and there's some examples listed there for you. And then the opportunities and threats are any external conditions that might be helpful to achieving the family's goals, if I could say that, the family's goal, action steps, and outcomes, and then any threats, meaning any conditions that might be harmful. So strengths and weaknesses, we're looking internally and externally, and then opportunities and threats, we're looking at external, but there also might be some internal conditions. So we're looking at internal and external there as well. If we can go back to page 95, here's your worksheet. So for that goal and the action steps and the outcome statements that you wrote, we are going to identify what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are for that goal and for that outcome statement. So you've got your page 96 gives you examples. We want you to borrow from those examples to fill in your SWOT. And I'm going to go silent here and let you do that. If we could have some work music for that. I am here. I'm paying attention to the chat. If you have a question, please unmute. We're going to do this in the main room as well. We are developing our SWOT analysis. That's what we're doing. And there may be some examples that are not on our list that you might think of that might fall within these categories. The other a thing to point out with the SWOT analysis as we proceed is the needs assessment results and findings, the asset mapping results and findings, and the capacity assessment results and findings should inform the way in which you identify your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's information that would be helpful as you and your stakeholders, in particular your board of directors, strategic planning committee, begin to decide what you will actually put in the plan. The SWOT analysis doesn't necessarily do anything for us. It is a way to frame our thinking as it relates to what we will ultimately choose to go in our plan based on our capacity to do so, based on what the needs are, and based on assets. So it serves as a guide to kind of lead the discussion as it relates to that. So what you should have developed at this point, a goal statement, action steps, outcome statement, completed a SWOT as it relates to that family of information. And you would do that with each of your goals to ultimately have, typically in a strategic plan, as you saw in the example, you'll have a different section for each of the goals that has all of that information. The layout may be different from nonprofit to nonprofit, but the content is typically not the same, but similar. And so that's important to remember. When you get to your page 97 in your materials, we are bringing it all together, okay? We're bringing it all together. We're putting it all together to create what I call the heart of the strategic plan. So there may be, if you've got 6 or 7 goals, you typically will have a page or a group of pages that reflect the goal action steps and the outcome information. So typically that's kind of how it's crafted. If you go back to what the plan looked like in terms of the example that we provided. I'm going to pause here for a moment to just kind of hear from you before we go into the breakout to talk about pulling it all together. So I'm going to just kind of wait here, and you can put questions in the chat, comments in the chat, or you can unmute yourself.
Dr. Palmer? Hi, it's Barbara Morales Burke. Could you just talk a minute about the relation between and difference between the goal statement, the action statement, and now I guess it's the goal, and the outcome statement? Because from the example that you've provided, it's pretty subtle.
Okay. So I
To me.
always, Barbara, the way it helps me practically is I look at the goal as the what we're going to do.
Right.
I look at the action steps as how I'm going to accomplish that goal. And the outcome statement is why or the impact of doing so. So if you look at my example, I chose to write a goal about creating a capacity building resource in a community. And so my what is that I was going to create and develop that resource, and I was going to make it available to individuals in that community or to nonprofits in that community. Then my action steps are how I'm going to go about doing it. I'm going to have an advisory group. I'm going to have students involved. I'm going to recruit some nonprofits to participate. So that's my how. Now my why is because in that community, what the nonprofits told me at that time is that they needed a capacity building resource, and they needed a way to frame how they manage nonprofits. In essence, once I did surveys with nonprofit execs, and I got that information back. So my outcome statement then was to not only to make that resource available, but it was to develop and implement a model for building capacity and to establish a permanent resource that would provide support services to nonprofit organizations.
Okay, thank you. That helps, and especially as you stress certain words in that outcome statement. Because when I first looked at it, it was like, going to create it, and now we're going to have it. But I understand better. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And to Barbara's question, keep in mind, you know, from nonprofit to nonprofit, you may have the very same type of program, or you may be very similar in your mission and vision, right? But when you get to this tedious work of strategic planning and you bring all your stakeholders together, the way in which it's verbalized or communicated is going to be unique and different. Someone else may have taken this same goal, right, and it be written a completely different way, but mean the same thing as well as the outcome. So I don't want us to think that there is a matter of fact recipe that is going to be the same for all organizations, but it is going to be uniquely crafted based on your language, based on your jargon, based on, you know, kind of where your nonprofit and or program operates, you know, in terms of implementation. I'm going to pause again for questions. Okay, so we're going to pull all this together. Page 97 is where we're going. So again, your goals, your action steps, and your outcomes, that's the heart of the plan. it's the heart of it. And so what we want you to do in your breakout, we're going to take, I'm going to do 7 minutes, Rebecca, just as I look at the time. We want you to go into your breakouts and talk about what you have developed in terms of the information that we've provided, and your deliverables are the goal statement, the action steps, the outcome statement, and the SWOT analysis. Those are your deliverables from what we just did. So we want you to go into your breakouts and talk about those pieces of information and how one might pull it together as it relates to page 97, your work plan. So we would take that information and transfer it to our work plan for each goal. So if you see on 97, you've got a goal statement, see my goal statement. We've got the anticipated outcome. We've got the how, and we've added the who and the when. And that takes place when you bring your stakeholders together in terms of that planning, in terms of the planning process. So we're going to go into breakouts. It is 12:14. I took one of your minutes, so we will come back at 12:20.
All right, opening up the rooms.
If I could hear from maybe a couple of us. And then we have just a couple more minutes of information from me, and then Rebecca will do the closeout and the instructions for what's next. So anybody open to sharing?
Well, I have a takeaway from everything from today. My takeaway is that if you've been in this process of strategic planning before, all of these materials help to jog my mind as like things to look for in the process that we've already done. And so it was a good jogger, like to go back. Did our strategic plan include this? Did we think about this? Did we think about this? And I spent some time looking at what we currently have and seeing if there were any holes, or a different, when we get to review it again, is there a way to make it simpler? Because I was saying in the session that the tools and resources that you need, if you outline everything and if you get it, if somebody can't pick it up and make sense of it, if it's not working, then it's just another tool that's going to sit. So I'm really looking at how the whole process of strategic planning and the tools that we use can be, very practical. And I also am looking at how not to use it as like a tool of assessment, but more like an affirmation document. You can look back and say, oh, look at how far we've come. That's less intimidating for me to say, we have this. And then when you review it, we're not reviewing it for evaluation. We're reviewing it to see where we are in our process and how we've developed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joy. Is there another voice that we can hear from before we move into closing?
Someone in our group suggested how some of these tools can also be versatile and be used in other areas besides just in strategic planning, such as a SWOT analysis could be used for writing grants, looking at different programs, or even personal professional development.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. If I could draw our attention to your materials. So we pulled it all together with the work plan, and if you notice, there's a worksheet also that's a part of your packet of information that can be filled out. And then when you go to page 99, this is the write and implement. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. There's the write and implement the plan on page 99. So in terms of what is the layout going to be? What is the format going to be? What's going to be the content information that is going to go in the plan? And then there's the monitoring and tracking. This is in terms of thinking about monitoring and tracking, we're focusing on goal achievement, challenges that we might face, lessons learned, success, the importance of the work that we're doing. We're highlighting that. And so this is the monitoring and tracking of progress. If we could move the page to that. And so again, goals and just identifying lessons learned. And this is page 100 in your packet. And every organization will identify how they want to capture that. And then lastly, your timeline, and then how will you report out that your plan is complete? What kind of presentation will you do as it relates to who you will share it with? Is important to kind of think about in terms of evaluating and revising the plan. Typically, we're reviewing the plan throughout the year, and we're giving updates and feedback. And so you want to kind of identify that, and your strategic planning committee is also, you know, still supporting that work. If we could move the page up one more page to page 101. This is the evaluating and revising the plan in terms of reporting out. In terms of our lesson for today, if we could go back to slide 5 in our PowerPoint. Maybe that's not the one. It's let's see. It's the agenda. Go back to the agenda. There we go. So this is where we started. This was the information that we were wanting to make sure that we covered today. And we will do a recap, just like we always do at the top of the next session. And there will be information in your wraparound that you should pay attention to that's related to strategic planning. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Dr. Palmer. So going to the closing slide, we are down to our last 2 sessions. Next week, we'll be talking about fundraising and financial management. I believe we'll be joined by Tracy Carriette, who is our, well, she wears many hats, but she certainly helps to keep us, all of our money straightened out and figured out, as well as HR. She's got lots of experience around that. We're delighted to have her join us. And I did want to mention that we, through some of the evaluation feedback, which we hope you'll fill that out for us when you get that. The link should pop up in your browser if you'd like to do it right after today's session and get it checked off your list. But we did go ahead and create a Facebook group, private group for this cohort to access and utilize to sort of share ideas, ask questions, share resources. And it's really intended for you all to drive that ship. We're certainly there to help support it, but it's intended for you all to make the most of it. So look for an invitation. It'll have a link. I believe it'll have a link in the wraparound for you all to click on that link. Make sure you're a fan, or I think it's a fan, or that you've liked the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, and then you'll be able to access or request membership to that group with the link that I provide in the wraparound. So with that being said, any final questions from anyone? We really appreciate you joining today's session, and we hope you got a lot out of it. I'm sure there's lots of ideas going around in your head. So feel free to take down some notes. And once you've got access to that Facebook group, feel free to post in there and connect with one another that way outside of these sessions. Excellent. Well, thanks again, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.